And which will drive the change fastest? Is it corporate changes towards environmental sustainability or individual consumer preferences? Which of those two are kind of making the biggest change?
Corporates will have the choice about how they drive that behaviour, actually, because they're the ones responsible for providing us products, in a sense. We create demand, but if you think about a business manages both its revenue and its costs. And part of the magic here, the magic formula, is going to be around creating products that don't cost anymore, that are better for the planet, that are well communicated in the consumer proposition, and that save money for that business or de-risk that business. So I think the answer to that is a sort of a blend, I would say. It would be foolish to say there's one thing that they should do or there's another thing they should do here. Unilever, for example, with its Lipton tea brand, very old brand, might be, it's quite successful in emerging markets, but in developed markets it's known as a sort of old brand, if you like, of tea. But by working with their supply chain and by really thinking about what sustainability means for tea and auditing the tea farmers and growers and labelling that on its product, it's managed to reach new customer segments and younger customer segments. So, and that also de-risks their supply chain because it means they secure, they have no worries about the security of supply in some of the areas of the tea production they have because of some of the work they've done.
And if you're a consumer, what is it that you should be most interested in, really, in terms of making decisions that will have an impact on these kinds of issues?
I think consumers need to be pushing companies. I mean, we are in the media, internet age. I think we have the opportunity to push companies more. Companies are exploring concepts such as big data, where they would like to latch on to every tweet that somebody makes about a particular product they have and link that through to the sourcing and the manufacturing, the logistics, so that they have a real end-to-end view of what the consumer wants linked to what they supply and provide. So actually, in this world, consumers have a lot of power. There's a lot of communication flow. So I think consumers should be pushing companies much harder, actually, for products that are more sustainable, for more evidence, and for better communication, most importantly.
If you had to touch one area or two areas there where the greatest change could be made, what do you think those are?
By consumers or
by consumers, yes.
Well, I think that the problem is the average consumer doesn't necessarily know about what the main environmental impacts are or how they're linked or what that looks like. So, for example, ClimateGate, those kind of things really skew the view of what environmental issues look like. The fact of the matter is the planet is warming up. The fact of the matter is we burn fossil fuels. They actually contribute towards air pollution and death, as well as climate change, if you believe some of the science. So solving some of these problems has great benefit to us as a planet, even if you discount one of those elements. And I don't think it's well understood. The other thing is, how many consumers actually know where their products come from or how they're produced? So when you buy a t-shirt or a pair of shoes, do you really know all the geographical locations, the links in the production stage? And the reason why I say that is because some of those links and some of those stages are quite, if you understand them, they're quite shocking. We have outsourced most of our production for a good reason, for low cost. But that's as a consequence potentially to humans and potentially to the environment. And so I think there needs to be more communication about that, and I'm sure that will be a major issue for governments at the Rio summit coming up in June. But I think that, as I say, I think consumers should be pressing more for that information communicated in ways that they can digest.
Turning back to business, in terms of global warming, and you mentioned the Rio summit, which corporate changes of this kind will make a serious impact on global warming?
Well, if you take environmental issues as a whole, we did a study for the United Nations last year, the United Nations Environment Programme and for the Principles for Responsible Investment and Investor Initiative. And we found that if you stack up global environmental damage caused by us, mankind, it amounts to about $6.6 trillion. Now, that amount is about 11% of global wealth, global GDP. It's also 20% higher than the combined losses of pension funds through the global financial crisis. So, in order of magnitude, is quite a big problem. Companies themselves are responsible for about a third of that. The top 3,000 companies alone are responsible for a third of that. So, them and their supply chains. And so, actually, I think companies can be a great force for change in this because they can act swiftly, potentially they act more swiftly than governments. They can influence supply chain, and they can use the price signal actually quite carefully by reflecting more of the environmental issues into price.
And so it would be possible to reduce within a reasonable time? What are we talking, 5 or 10 years? That large sum that you mentioned a moment ago?
I think, well, first of all, it's impossible to completely reduce our impact on the planet. And in fact, the planet has a capacity to absorb some of the activities we have. The challenge we have, though, is that in the next 20 years, there will be 3 billion new consumers, middle-class consumers, that will demand the same things as we're demanding today. That's against the backdrop of actually less supply of raw materials that we need to provide those consumers with the goods they want to buy. So, for example, if you look over the last 100 years to 2001, the basket of commodities that we rely on as raw materials, the price has actually declined by 1% if you adjust for things like inflation, so the real price, the index price, if you like. From 2001 onwards to now, that price has increased exponentially and become much more volatile. So, massive demand in the future, limited supply, or limiting supply going forward, and I think that basic equation we need to fix. And I think companies are in the ideal position to fix that because it involves clever design decisions that take into account environmental and scarcity resource issues. It involves clever thinking about how to compete with their customers in that vein. And so you combine those two things together, a product that is better manufactured using less materials that are virgin materials, transported less distances. So GE, for example, have just insourced a lot of their manufacturing to the United States for the very reason that transportation costs are going up. It's a smart move.
Presumably the cost of oil to get a container from China to the USA is now.
Yeah, so labour no longer is the sole driver of where you manufacture goods. And that's only going to increase. So there's a massive opportunity, 3 billion new consumers. Anyone facing consumers must be thinking that's a great opportunity. And we will come out of this recession and meet that need, hopefully. But how are we going to meet that need? We're going to have to meet that need in smarter ways. So I do think if this agenda is thought of in a truly commercial way, not in an emotive way, then I think that the businesses are in the right place to solve some of these problems in the next 20 years.
Richard, thanks for talking to me today.
Thank you, Richard.